Steve Harvey has hosted Family Feud through every kind of surprise a game show can produce. He has seen tears of joy, explosive arguments, and confessions that nobody saw coming. But on a March evening in 2027, a wife stopped the game in the middle of a round and exposed something about her husband that hit Steve Harvey harder than any affair or any lie he had ever heard on his stage. Because this was not about another woman. This was about a mother, a sick, elderly mother whose medical fund had been quietly drained by the man who was supposed to be helping take care of her. And when the wife laid out the numbers on Steve Harvey's stage, the look on Steve's face was not his famous comedic shock. It was fury, real, controlled, personal fury. Because Steve Harvey lost his own mother, he understood what a mother means. And hearing that a man had stolen from a dying woman's medical account while his wife worked double shifts to keep that account funded was the one thing Steve Harvey could not process with patience or diplomacy. He reacted fast, and what he said became one of the most emotionally charged moments in the history of the show. There was a time when caring for an aging parent was considered sacred. There was a time when the money set aside for a mother's medical needs was untouchable, the one account nobody would ever question or compromise. But when Tanya Marshall discovered that her husband, Keith Marshall, had been siphoning money from her mother's medical care fund for over 2 years, she learned that some betrayals go deeper than the heart. They go to the soul. Because stealing from a dying woman's care fund is not just a financial crime. It is the violation of something so fundamental, so universally sacred, that even Steve Harvey, the man who always has something to say, struggled to find words big enough to hold his anger. If you believe that there are some things in life that should be untouchable and that a family's most vulnerable members deserve protection above all else, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel right now. What this wife reveals about her husband and the way Steve Harvey responds will shake you to your core. Tanya Marshall was 38 years old. She was from Memphis, Tennessee, the only daughter of Walter and May Louise Johnson. Walter had worked as a sanitation worker for the city of Memphis for 32 years, driving the same routes through the same neighborhoods in the same truck until his knees and his back told him it was time to stop. May Louise had been a cafeteria worker at an elementary school for 26 years, serving breakfast and lunch to thousands of children who knew her simply as Miss May, the woman who always gave extra portions to the kids who looked hungry and who always had a kind word for the ones who looked sad. Walter and May Louise were not people anyone would call remarkable by the world's standards. They were remarkable by the standards that actually matter. They showed up every day, they served their community, and they raised a daughter who inherited every ounce of their devotion. May Louise was the center of Tanya's world, not in the abstract way people talk about loving their mothers. In the daily, physical hands-on way that comes from being an only child whose mother was her first teacher, her first friend, and the person she called every single evening without exception since leaving home at 18. Tanya and May Louise talked about everything. Recipes, neighborhood gossip, the sermon from Sunday, the score of the Grizzlies game. Nothing was too small to discuss, and nothing was too large to face together. When Walter died of a heart attack 6 years ago, it was Tanya who moved her mother from the family house into a small apartment closer to Tanya's home so she could check on her every day. When May Louise was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's 3 years ago, it was Tanya who researched every treatment option, visited every memory care facility in the area, and set up the medical care fund that would ensure her mother received the best possible care for as long as she needed it. Tanya was a certified nursing assistant who worked at a long-term care facility in Memphis. The irony was not lost on her. She spent her days caring for other people's aging parents and then came home and cared for her own. She worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes picking up doubles to earn overtime, and every extra dollar she made went into May Louise's medical care fund. The fund was a savings account that Tanya had set up specifically for her mother's needs. Medication, doctor visits, the eventual memory care facility that Tanya knew would become necessary as the Alzheimer's progressed. She had built the fund to over $31,000 through 3 years of overtime shifts, sacrificed vacations, and personal austerity. She drove a car with 200,000 miles on it. She had not bought new clothes for herself in 2 years. She packed her lunch every day instead of eating out. Every penny she could spare went to May Louise's fund, because May Louise had spent 26 years feeding other people's children, and Tanya was going to make sure that the woman who served everyone else was served properly in her final years. She met Keith Marshall at a coworker's birthday party when she was 25. Keith was 28, a warehouse shift supervisor for a distribution company on the outskirts of Memphis. He was practical, easygoing, and appeared to share Tanya's blue-collar work ethic. He understood long shifts and tired feet and paychecks that never seemed to stretch far enough. He was not romantic in the flowers and poetry sense. He was romantic in the showing up sense. He fixed things around May Louise's apartment without being asked. He drove Tanya to work when her car was in the shop. He sat with May Louise on Sunday afternoons and listened to her stories about the children she had fed at the school cafeteria, even after the Alzheimer's started making the stories loop and repeat. Keith seemed like a good man, a reliable man, the kind of man that a sanitation worker and a cafeteria lady would have approved of. They married after 3 years. The ceremony was small, held at the community center where May Louise used to volunteer, because by that point May Louise's Alzheimer's made travel difficult and Tanya wanted her mother present and comfortable. May Louise wore her best dress and smiled throughout the ceremony, though Tanya was not sure how much she understood about what was happening. During the reception, May Louise pulled Tanya close and said, in one of her clearer moments, "Baby, make sure he is good to you. And make sure he is good to me. Because when I cannot take care of myself anymore, I am trusting you to pick the right people to do it." Tanya held her mother's face in her hands and promised. It was the most important promise she had ever made. For the first 7 years of the marriage, Keith appeared to honor that promise. He helped Tanya manage May Louise's care. He drove May Louise to doctor's appointments when Tanya was working. He picked up her prescriptions. He was present in the daily logistics of caring for an aging parent with a progressive disease. Tanya trusted him with the household finances because he handled the bills while she handled the caregiving, and the division of labor seemed fair and functional. They had 2 children. Their daughter Zoe was now 8, a quiet and observant girl who had inherited May Louise's gentle disposition and Tanya's watchfulness. Their son Marcus was 5, energetic and loud, who called May Louise Granny May, and who did not yet understand why Granny May sometimes could not remember his name. 6 months before the Family Feud taping, Tanya received a call from May Louise's neurologist's office informing her that the last 3 months of payments had not been received. Tanya was confused. She transferred money to the medical fund every month. Keith was responsible for paying the medical bills from that account. She called the bank to check the fund's balance. The account that was supposed to contain over $31,000 contained $412. Tanya did not understand the number at first. She asked the bank representative to repeat it. $412. She asked for the transaction history, what she received. In an email that arrived while she was sitting in the parking lot of the care facility between shifts, was a record of systematic withdrawals over the past 26 months. Cash withdrawals in round numbers, transfers to accounts she did not recognize. The fund she had built through 3 years of double shifts and packed lunches and a 200,000-mile car had been quietly, methodically emptied by the only other person who had access to it, her husband. Tanya sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes. She did not cry. She did not call Keith. She called May Louise's care facility and confirmed that the next phase of her mother's treatment, the transition to a memory care unit that the neurologist had recommended, would cost approximately $28,000 for the first year. Money that was supposed to be in the fund. Money that was gone. Tanya investigated for 6 months. She traced the withdrawals. She identified the destination accounts, which turned out to be personal accounts Keith had opened without her knowledge. She could not determine with certainty what he had spent the money on, but the pattern of withdrawals, their timing, and their amounts suggested a combination of personal spending, online purchases, and what appeared to be sports betting transactions. The specifics mattered less to Tanya than the fundamental fact. Over $30,000 intended for her dying mother's care had been redirected by her husband for his own use. While May Louise's prescriptions went unpaid, while her neurologist's office sent collection notices, while Tanya worked doubles to fund an account that was being drained as fast as she could fill it. The Family Feud appearance was Keith's idea. He had applied months before Tanya found the account discrepancy. The team was Keith, Tanya, Tanya's cousin and closest confidant, Yolanda, Tanya's co-worker Brenda, and May Louise's younger sister Aunt Dot, who was 69 years old and who had been May Louise's protector since childhood and who had no idea what Keith had done. Tanya agreed to go. She did not tell anyone except Yolanda, who helped her prepare. She brought the bank statements. The Marshall team was matched against the Cardenas family from El Paso, Texas, a Mexican-American family of 5 whose grandmother had recently celebrated her 100th birthday and who arrived on stage in a wheelchair pushed by her great-grandson, receiving a standing ovation from the studio audience before the game even started. The energy was warm and celebratory, with the Cardenas centenarian becoming an instant audience favorite. During introductions, Keith performed his role smoothly. He introduced Tanya as my hard-working wife who takes care of everybody, including her mama who has Alzheimer's. He said it with what appeared to be pride. The audience applauded. Tanya smiled tightly. Yolanda, standing in the lineup, kept her expression neutral through what must have been enormous effort. Aunt Dot, at the end of the lineup, beamed with genuine warmth because she had no reason not to. The game moved through the first 2 rounds without incident. The Marshalls won both. Keith was charming. Tanya was sharp. Aunt Dot gave one answer with such matter-of-fact Southern certainty that Steve Harvey doubled over laughing. Everything looked normal. Everything felt like a family having a good time. The 3rd round arrived. Steve read the question. We asked 100 people, what is the worst thing you could discover your spouse has been hiding? Tanya was up for the face-off. She hit the buzzer. She looked at Steve Harvey, and then she stopped playing. Steve, I need to stop the game. I am sorry. I need to stop the game right now. Because the answer to that question is not something I can say in survey format. The worst thing I discovered my spouse was hiding is that he has been stealing from my mother's medical care fund. My mother has Alzheimer's, Steve. I have been working double shifts for 3 years to build a fund to pay for her care. The fund was supposed to have over $31,000 in it. 6 months ago, I checked the balance. It had $412. My husband, the man standing right behind me, has been withdrawing money from my sick mother's medical account for over 2 years. My mother, Steve. My mother who cannot remember what day it is. My mother who fed other people's children for 26 years at a school cafeteria. He stole from her. He stole the money that was supposed to take care of her when she could no longer take care of herself. The studio did not erupt the way it had during affair revelations. It contracted. The sound that 200 people made was not a gasp. It was closer to a groan, the low, visceral sound of collective moral pain. Because what Tanya had just described was not romantic betrayal. It was something that hit at a deeper, more primal level. A sick mother, an Alzheimer's diagnosis, a medical fund built from overtime shifts and sacrifice, and a husband who had drained it. The audience was not processing shock. They were processing revulsion. The kind that makes your stomach tighten and your hands clench. The kind that transcends personal reaction and becomes something closer to communal outrage. The Cardenas family centenarian, sitting in her wheelchair across the stage, reached out and grasped her great-grandson's arm. She did not speak English well, but she understood the word mother and the word steal, and the tone of a daughter's voice breaking over the combination of the two. She shook her head slowly, the ancient and universal gesture of someone who has lived long enough to recognize evil when she hears it. Keith's face went through a rapid series of changes that the cameras captured in unforgiving detail. The charming smile vanished. The easy confidence dissolved. What replaced it was not remorse, it was panic. The specific kind of panic that comes from a man who calculated that his secret was safe and who was now watching it be announced on national television by the woman he had stolen from. Aunt Dot's reaction was the one that broke the studio open. May Louise's younger sister, 69 years old, who had been standing in the lineup smiling warmly all day, heard the words, "Stealing from my mother's medical care fund," and her face underwent a transformation that was physically startling. The warmth drained completely. What replaced it was something older and harder. The protective fury of a sister who had spent her entire life looking out for May Louise, and who had just learned that the man she had welcomed into the family had been stealing from her sister's care. Aunt Dot turned to Keith. She did not speak. She did not need to. The look on her face was a sentence more devastating than any words. It said, "You took from my sister," and that look, captured by the cameras and later viewed by millions, became one of the defining images of the entire episode. Steve Harvey's reaction was different from every other intervention he had ever made on the show. There was no slow build, no gradual escalation from host to intervener. Steve's body language changed instantly. His card hit the podium, his jaw set, his eyes locked on Keith with an intensity that was not the comedians or the entertainers. It was personal. Steve Harvey had spoken publicly many times about the loss of his own mother and about what mothers meant to him as a man, and hearing that someone had stolen from a mother's medical fund activated something in Steve that was beyond professional. It was visceral. "Stop the game," Steve said. His voice was not quiet. It was not measured. It was clipped and hard, the voice of a man who was controlling something much bigger underneath it. "The game is over. Right now." Steve pulled his earpiece out and crossed the stage to center. He did not take his time. He moved with the urgency of a man who had heard something that demanded an immediate response. When he stopped, he did not address Tanya first. He went straight to Keith. "Keith, I want you to listen to me, because I am going to say this once and I am going to say it clearly. In all my years on this stage, I have heard men confess to affairs. I have heard about hidden debts. I have heard about secret families and fabricated identities, and all of those things are terrible. But what your wife just described is something different. It is something I do not have a category for, because you did not steal from a bank. You did not steal from a business. You stole from a sick woman's medical fund. You stole from a mother with Alzheimer's, a woman who cannot defend herself, a woman who cannot check her own bank balance, a woman who does not know what day it is. You reached into the account that your wife built with her own overtime shifts and her own sacrifice to take care of her dying mother, and you took over $30,000 out of it. For yourself." Steve paused. His jaw was working. The audience could see him physically containing himself. "I lost my mother. I know what mothers mean. I know what it feels like when the woman who raised you needs you to take care of her the way she took care of you. And I know that the money set aside for that care is the most sacred money in any household. It is not a savings account. It is not a rainy day fund. It is the promise you made to the woman who gave you life. Your wife made that promise to May Louise. She worked doubles. She drove a car with 200,000 miles on it. She packed her lunch every single day. She put every spare dollar into that account. And you emptied it, while May Louise's prescriptions went unpaid. While the neurologist's office sent collection notices. While your wife came home exhausted from a 12-hour shift believing she was building something that would protect her mother. You were dismantling it behind her back. The audience response was not applause. It was the low, heavy murmur of collective outrage. Several people shook their heads. A woman in the front row was crying. A man 3 rows back had his hands pressed together in front of his mouth, his eyes closed, as if what he was hearing was physically difficult to absorb. Steve continued, "I have been in situations where I have felt sympathy for the men on my stage. Men who made mistakes. Men who were weak. Men who were caught up in something they could not control. But I am going to be honest with you, Keith. I am struggling to find sympathy right now, because this is not a moment of weakness. This is 26 months of deliberate withdrawals from a sick woman's medical account, 26 months of watching your wife come home from double shifts and knowing that the money she earned was going into an account that you were emptying. That is not a mistake. That is a system. You built a system to steal from a woman with Alzheimer's. And you did it while driving her to her doctor's appointments and picking up her prescriptions. You played the role of the caring son-in-law while you robbed her, and I do not know what to call that, Keith. I have words for cheating. I have words for lying. I do not have a word for what you did, because I have never encountered it before. Keith tried to speak. His voice was thin and strained. Tanya, I was going to put it back. I got behind on some things. I was going to replace it before anyone noticed. Steve held up his hand. Stop. Do not say that. Do not stand on my stage and say you were going to put it back, because that is what every person who steals from someone says. I was going to put it back. But you did not put it back, Keith. For 26 months, you did not put it back. And in the meantime, your mother-in-law's care was compromised. Payments were missed. Treatment was delayed. And your wife, who trusted you with the one thing she cared about most in the world, her mother's well-being, was working herself to exhaustion funding an account you were draining. You were not going to put it back. You were hoping nobody would check. Steve turned to Tanya. His voice changed completely. The fury that had been directed at Keith dissolved into something gentler, something that carried the specific reverence of a man addressing a daughter who was fighting for her mother. Tanya, your mother, May Louise, spent 26 years feeding other people's children at a school cafeteria. She gave extra portions to the ones who looked hungry. She gave kind words to the ones who looked sad. That woman spent her entire working life making sure that children who were not hers were taken care of. And now that she needs to be taken care of, you stepped up. You worked doubles. You sacrificed. You built a fund with your own hands and your own exhaustion. And the fact that it was stolen from you does not diminish what you built. It tells me who you are. You are May Louise's daughter. You take care of people, even when the people around you are taking from you. Aunt Dot spoke for the first time. Her voice carried the steel of a 69-year-old woman whose protective instincts had been triggered at the most primal level. My sister May Louise cannot speak for herself anymore. That disease took her words from her. But I have my words, and I am going to say what May Louise would say if she could. She trusted this man. She sat with him on Sunday afternoons and told him her stories, even when she had already told them twice. She let him drive her to the doctor. She let him into her life because her daughter chose him. And he repaid that trust by stealing the money that was supposed to keep her safe. My sister fed children for 26 years. She made sure nobody in that cafeteria went hungry. And now the fund that was supposed to feed her care is empty because of the man her daughter married. May Louise cannot say this. So I will. Shame on you, Keith Marshall. My sister deserved better. And you know it. The standing ovation that followed was the most emotionally intense of any episode in the show's recent history. It was not celebratory. It was solidarity. 200 people standing for a daughter who had worked doubles to protect her mother, and for a 69-year-old aunt who had just spoken for a sister who could no longer speak for herself. Tanya looked at Keith. The bank statements were still in her hand. She held them up one last time. $412, Keith. That is what is left of 3 years of my overtime. $412 standing between my mother and a care facility that cannot take her because we cannot pay. You told me during our wedding that you understood what it meant to take care of my mama. You told May Louise you would be good to her. And she believed you. She cannot remember your name anymore, Keith. But I can. And I am going to remember it for the rest of my life. Not as the name of my husband, as the name of the man who stole from my mother while she was too sick to know it was happening. Steve Harvey addressed the camera. His eyes were red. His voice was thick but controlled. I have stood on this stage many times and spoken about betrayal. But tonight I am not talking about betrayal. I am talking about something that does not have a name in polite conversation. A man stole from a sick woman's medical fund, not a stranger. Her son-in-law, the man who drove her to the doctor, the man who sat with her on Sunday afternoons. He stole from a woman with Alzheimer's while her daughter worked 12-hour shifts to fund the account he was emptying. I want every person watching to sit with that for a moment, because if that does not make you check your own family's accounts tonight, nothing will. Protect the people who cannot protect themselves. That is the lesson. That has always been the lesson. And May Louise Johnson, the cafeteria worker who spent 26 years making sure nobody went hungry, deserves to be protected now. She has earned that. With every plate she served, with every child she fed, with every kind word she spoke, she earned it. And the fact that the man who was supposed to help protect her was the one stealing from her is the most heartbreaking thing I have heard in my career. Because some betrayals break your heart. This one breaks your faith in people, and I need a minute before I can get mine back. The game was never completed. Both families received their full prizes and compensation. The Cardenas family centenarian was wheeled to where Tanya was standing backstage. Through her great-grandson, who translated from Spanish, the 100-year-old woman said, "I have lived 100 years. I have seen wars and poverty and terrible things. But I have never heard of a man stealing from his wife's sick mother. You protect your mother, Mija. She protected you first." Tanya knelt beside the wheelchair and held the old woman's hand for a long time without speaking. When the episode aired 7 weeks later, it became one of the most discussed and most emotionally impactful Family Feud episodes ever produced. The clip was viewed over 100 million times, but unlike other viral Family Feud moments that were driven by the drama of romantic betrayal, this episode resonated because of the specific nature of the theft. Stealing from a mother's medical fund crossed a moral line that audiences across every demographic, every political persuasion, and every cultural background recognized as inviolable. The detail about May Louise being a cafeteria worker who fed hungry children for 26 years deepened the moral outrage exponentially. This was not just a sick woman. This was a woman who had spent her life serving others and who was now being failed by someone inside her own family. That detail, more than any other, drove the emotional response. The episode sparked a national conversation about elder financial abuse, a form of exploitation that advocacy organizations had been trying to bring to public attention for years. Elder care experts noted that the scenario Tanya described, a family member with account access systematically draining a vulnerable person's funds, was far more common than most people realized. A national elder abuse hotline reported a 40% increase in calls in the 2 weeks following the episode's airing. An elder law attorney published a widely shared article using the episode as a case study in how financial exploitation of elderly family members occurs and how families can protect against it. The article recommended that families establish independent oversight of accounts designated for elder care, the exact safeguard that might have prevented Keith's theft if it had been in place. Tanya returned to Memphis and took immediate steps to protect May Louise's care. With the help of a legal aid attorney who had seen the episode and offered services pro bono, Tanya had Keith removed from all access to the medical fund and May Louise's accounts. She established an independent fiduciary oversight arrangement to prevent any future unauthorized access. She also filed a formal report with Adult Protective Services, which opened an investigation into Keith's withdrawals. The legal process was ongoing, but the protection of May Louise's remaining resources was secured. The financial damage was severe but not irreversible. In the weeks after the episode aired, donations began arriving at a GoFundMe campaign that Yolanda had set up with Tanya's permission. The campaign raised over $85,000 in its first month, more than double what Keith had taken. The money was placed in a new account under independent oversight, and Tanya was able to secure May Louise's placement in a memory care facility that specialized in Alzheimer's patients. When Tanya visited her mother for the first time at the new facility, May Louise did not recognize her, but she held Tanya's hand and said, "You are a nice girl." Tanya said, "I know, Mama. I am your girl." May Louise smiled. It was a moment of connection that the disease allowed for a few seconds before the clouds returned. But Tanya held on to those seconds the way she held on to everything that mattered, tightly, completely, for as long as they lasted. Tanya and Keith separated within a month of the episode airing. The legal proceedings regarding the stolen funds were handled through the court system. Keith did not contest the separation or the financial claims. People close to the situation said he had been cooperative, but had offered no adequate explanation for the withdrawals beyond vague references to financial pressure and poor decisions. He did not make a public statement. Aunt Dot gave one interview after the episode aired. She sat on the porch of her house in Memphis, a porch that May Louise had sat on with her 1,000 times before the Alzheimer's made visits difficult, and spoke with the controlled emotion of a woman who had spent 70 years protecting her older sister, and who was not going to stop now. May Louise was the kindest person I have ever known. She spent her whole life feeding children who were not hers, because she could not stand the thought of a child being hungry. She gave extra portions because she said you never know which child needs it most. And now she cannot feed herself. She cannot remember my name some days. But I remember hers, and I remember what she deserves. She deserves care. She deserves safety. She deserves the money her daughter saved for her to actually be there when she needs it. What that man did to my sister is something I will never forgive, not because I am bitter, because some things should not be forgiven. Some things should be named and remembered so they never happen again. Steve Harvey spoke about the Marshall episode at several events in the months that followed. At a charity benefit for Alzheimer's research, he gave a speech that was viewed over 50 million times. I have talked about a lot of things on my stage: love, betrayal, family, forgiveness, but the episode that changed me the most was the one where a wife told me her husband had been stealing from her mother's medical care fund. A mother with Alzheimer's. A woman who spent her career feeding children, and I stood on that stage and I felt something I had never felt during a taping. Rage. Not the performative kind. The real kind. The kind that comes from imagining someone doing that to my mother. The kind that makes you want to put down the microphone and pick up something else. I did not do that. I used my words. But I want to be honest about where those words came from. They came from love. Love for mothers. Love for daughters who sacrifice everything to care for them. And anger at anyone who would exploit a family's most vulnerable member for their own benefit. If this episode accomplished one thing, I hope it is this. I hope every family watching checked their elderly parents' accounts that night, because the people who steal from the vulnerable do not look like criminals. They look like family, and sometimes the most dangerous person in the house is the one with the password. Zoe, Tanya's 8-year-old daughter, made something for her grandmother. It was a picture book stapled together from construction paper, with drawings of May Louise at the school cafeteria. Each page showed Granny May serving food to children, with speech bubbles that said things like, "Hair is extra for you, baby. And you look hungry. Let me get you more." Zoe gave the book to her mother to bring to the memory care facility. Tanya read it to May Louise during a visit. May Louise looked at the drawings and smiled. She said, "Those children look hungry. We should feed them." Tanya said, "You already did, Mama. You fed them for 26 years. May Louise nodded and patted Tanya's hand. She did not remember who Tanya was, but something in the drawings, some deep body memory of serving food to small people, had reached a place the disease had not yet touched. And for a few minutes, in a memory care facility in Memphis, a grandmother and a granddaughter's picture book had a conversation that spanned generations. It was not much, but it was everything. 1 year later, Family Feud invited Tanya back for a special update. She walked onto the stage to a standing ovation that lasted over 90 seconds. She wore scrubs because she had come straight from a shift at the care facility, and a small silver locket that contained a photograph of May Louise from her cafeteria years, smiling behind the serving counter in her hairnet and apron. Beside Tanya, in the front row, sat Aunt Dot with a handkerchief in her lap, Yolanda with her phone ready to record, and Zoe, who was holding a new picture book she had made because the first one was now taped to the wall of May Louise's room at the facility. Steve hugged her and held on. "Tanya Marshall, how are you doing?" Tanya smiled, the tired, earned, unbreakable smile of a woman who had been through the worst year of her life and was still showing up. "Steve, my mama is in a good facility. She has a room with a window that looks out at a garden. She does not remember my name most days, but she smiles when I come in. She smiles at my scrubs because I think she remembers what scrubs mean. They mean someone is here to take care of you. And I am here, Steve, every day." The fund is restored. The donations from people who watched our episode covered everything and more. There are strangers in this country who have never met my mother, and who made sure she would be cared for. I cannot explain what that means to me. My mother spent her life making sure nobody went hungry. And when she needed help, nobody let her go hungry either. The world fed her back, Steve. The way she fed it. Steve pressed his hand to his chest. Tanya, a year ago you stopped a game show to tell the truth about what was happening to your mother's medical fund. You did not do it for attention. You did not do it for revenge. You did it because your mother cannot speak for herself anymore, and someone had to. And you did it because Aunt Dot was right. Some things should be named and remembered. What Keith did has been named, and it has been remembered. And because it was named and remembered, 85,000 people sent money to make sure May Louise got the care she earned. The cafeteria lady who gave extra portions to hungry children just got the biggest extra portion of her life. From a country full of strangers who decided that Miss May was not going to go hungry. Not on their watch. Aunt Dot, in the front row, pressed her handkerchief to her eyes and whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch, "That is right. Not on our watch." And the audience, who had been standing since Tanya walked on stage, erupted one final time, not for the drama, not for the clip, for May Louise, for the cafeteria worker who gave extra portions, for the woman with Alzheimer's who could not remember her own daughter's name, but who smiled when she saw Scrubs because somewhere deep inside, she still knew what care looked like. The world had fed her back, and the daughter who had stopped a game show to protect her was still showing up, every shift, every visit, every day, in Scrubs and a silver locket and the unshakable knowledge that some things in life are untouchable. A mother's care is one of them, and Tanya Marshall made sure the whole world knew it. If this story reminded you that the people who cared for us deserve to be cared for in return, that some accounts should be untouchable, and that the bravest thing a daughter can do is speak for a mother who can no longer speak for herself, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on that notification bell so you never miss another powerful story. We bring you the most incredible and emotional Family Feud moments every single week. Real families, real protection, and real love that shows up when it matters most. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.